Welcome back to Genshin Interact. Today we're going to be looking and talking about Chiori and looking at really a pre-release analysis and guide about how she probably is working in general, what we can see before her release, and really looking at how you should probably be farming and getting ready for her in terms of teams, and looking at is it worth, actually getting her at the end of the day. So really just jumping right into it. First of all, looking at just in general, her skill and her burst. Her normal attacks, you could level this. She does get an infusion after using her skill from her passive, so keep that in mind a little bit. But your normal attack's not really a talent you want to go too heavily invested into. The big part that you're going to want to focus on is her skill. Now, with her skill, she does have a construct that she puts out on field called a Sode, and that Sode will do damage of AoE geo damage based off of her attack and defense. So make sure when you're looking at stats and artifacts, which we'll talk about later, you're going to want to focus on those two as well, just in general for her entire kit. Now, in general, when you're obviously talking about this Sode that's off field, it is going to be labeled when you do a hold skill as a geo construct. And then while active, if there are other geo constructs nearby, things like Ushi from Ito as well as Zhongli's pillars are considered geo constructs, and if those are created nearby as well, an additional Sode or little doll will be summoned next to your active character as well, and so you can have up to 2 Sodes on the active character, and that just basically is going to help get more damage out for her. Now, Rift, besides looking at her skill, I know that's where a lot of damage is, especially off field for other characters. What about her big, huge hit and her burst?
Yeah, well, her burst is very, very simple. There's not really a lot to it. It's kind of just a one-hitter, but this one hit that she does deal scales on both her attack and defense, and a lot of it. Even just at skill level 8, we're looking at 410% of attack plus 513% defense. Again, at skill level 8, like that's a lot. That's a huge hit, and it's got very energy efficient. The energy cost is only 50, and it has a short cooldown of 13.5 seconds. So really just a nice punch of damage that you can probably get out every rotation, looking real good. So she does look very selfish with damage, so lots of damage coming from the burst, lots of damage coming from the skill, especially off field. And as you were talking about, a lot of geo constructs, getting another one of that, just increasing her personal damage. So seeming kind of most like a damage type unit. I think it's going to be interesting playing her with other characters and all kinds of different teams. And so because she's not locked to being just a supportive unit, which could have been more niche for her, right? If she was a more support type unit, that probably would have limit her to only geo teams. But maybe because she is focused on a lot of damage, she can also get away with playing on other teams, like other pyro team, really just anything, in my opinion, because it's just like extra damage for the team, right? And it's kind of like that's kind of how Albedo is. He can kind of be thrown in other stuff, partially because he can give EM to other characters, So I think it'll be very interesting to see what we can play around with her and her kit. But looking at her passives, Vixen, what do you have to say about that?
Well, like in general, which we're kind of interested to see, because really looking at Chiori a little while ago, she felt a little bit more focused on, maybe we thought she was going to be more of a support, really specifically looking at someone like Navia. Well, as obviously we've seen more and more of her, the more we realize that everything in her kit just tends to do with herself, and like you said, being very selfish. And with her first passive talent, Tailor Made, basically very long description, but it's going to get to a point where if you use your skill, you're going to grant your characters or other party members a certain thing that's going to help the normal charge attack, things, basically whatever damage they're going to be doing. There's going to be an executed coordinated attack when they do normal attacks, charge attacks, and plunging attacks, which is actually kind of nice considering we've kind of come off of a quote-unquote plunging meta, looking at characters like Zhao and Gaming, and then just in general, most characters like Shan Yun can just actually just make most characters just do it and do it effectively. And so this kind of helps maybe a little bit more. It may just be nice to have an extra character in there to do lots of damage, and Chiori could be that help. If you've already got a really strong DPS and you've got, some other characters that you're pretty solid with, but you want some more extra damage just from other characters in the team, even if it's not specifically a geocentric team, she can do a lot with that. And also in charge of this, when you get this, when she does her skill in her passive talent, Chiori will gain an infusion of geo for 5 seconds, so that helps her a little bit more with personal damage. And then do keep in mind, she has a passive talent called the Finishing Touch that states that when nearby party members create a geo construct, Chiori will gain 20% geo damage for 20 seconds. It doesn't seem like this stacks at all, so just once again keep that in mind, that you can only probably get a 20% geo damage bonus, but it is still very helpful because it goes on for 20 whole seconds.
All right, so now talking about the weapons that Chiori can make use of, looking specifically at 5 stars. Now, before I say anything, obviously 5 stars are going to be really great options just for the higher base attack and usually good stats all around. Of course, her personal weapon, Uraku Misugiri, is going to be her best in slot option, providing her with the crit damage and the passive giving her a lot of defense and skill damage, stuff like that. Very great for her. But some other very good options, even Furina's weapon could be a good option just because of the massive amount of crit damage. So that's obviously going to be very helpful. Now, the ability on it, probably not going to work out too much. So if you have Furina's weapon lying around and maybe you're not using Furina in the same team as Chiori, you can kind of just throw this on her, something like that. But I actually really like Miss Splitter for Chiori because she can actually get the full use out of the ability. It's not as much crit damage, it's only 44%, but it's still like it's there. And also the base attack is a lot higher, sitting at 674. So this weapon I actually would prefer if you don't have Uraku Misugiri. This weapon can really upgrade her because you can get full use out of the ability. There's some other things out there like Primordial Jade Cutter if you need the crit rate, also Haranga Paku Futsu for the same reason. And you could use Light of Foliar Incision also for the massive amount of crit damage. You get a touch of crit rate on there as well, and some elemental damage, which if you're using Geo Infusion with Chiori, she's going to make use of that, right? There is also talk about using Summit Shaper, but I'm honestly not the biggest fan of this. But if you have it, it works, right? And you're getting all the extra attack. I guess I just don't like it because it's not crit rate or crit damage. But, you're still getting some shield strength, especially if you're using Zhongli with her, which is going to be a great teammate for her because of the Geo construct. So there still are some things going for her there. And just being a 5-star, like I said, it's going to give you that extra attack.
Now, when talking about looking at more 4 stars, and we've already kind of gone over the 5 stars, so looking at 4 stars in general, probably my 2 favorite weapons for her in terms of 4 stars are actually the Black Sword and Wolfang. And I think I hold the Wolfang a little bit higher, and the reason why is because even though it is a Battle Pass weapon, and so it is gated by getting the Battle Pass, it has a crit rate main stat, and you obviously are going to want to focus on having at least a decent crit rate, and crit damage ratio with Chiori, considering she is going to be some sort of damage dealer on your account. And so obviously you want to have some good attack and defense as well, considering she scales off of that. So this main stat is crit rate on Wolfang. And the ability helps with elemental skill and elemental burst damage just in general. And then when an elemental skill hits an opponent, the crit rate is also increased. And then when an elemental burst hits an opponent, the crit rate will also be increased as well. And you have 4 stacks of that, and it's each at R1, 2%. So you can get basically an extra 8% crit rate just on this. So it helps your higher numbers to just hit more often, as well as just helping skill and burst damage in general. I think Wolfang's a really good weapon. Looking at Black Sword, the crit rate main stat as well is the same thing at level 90, 27.6% crit rate. And then the ability has the increase of damage dealt by normal charge attacks by 20%. The reason I would probably use this specific weapon a little bit more is if you're trying to focus on more of an infusion-based Chiori. I know that a lot of people at some point are probably going to try to use her on some sort of quick swap thing where after you use your skill, you have 5 seconds of an infusion and just try to go heavily into that and maybe try to pair that with a Marjazé Hunter set to just get more normal and charge attack damage. Personally, I wouldn't go this route. I do think that Wolfang is probably going to be the best for her. Now, also in general, when you are looking at some of the weapons, I did find Finale of the Deep to be a very interesting weapon. It has an attack percent main stat, so you will probably focus more on defense percent on your substats and your main stats on when you're looking at Chiori's actual artifacts. But the ability on this weapon is really nice because it states that when using an elemental skill, attack will be increased by 12% for 15 seconds, and then it basically has the Bond of Life effect, which doesn't help her too much with her actual damage. So basically what I'm getting at here is that it's a nice weapon to just boost a bunch of your attack to happen consistently. So I would probably say to try to get, if you have this weapon, I would say it's going to be pretty good on her. Just make sure that you're going to focus on defense percent when you look at her artifacts.
Speaking of artifacts, there are 3 main sets that I really like the idea of using on Chiori, with 2 other ones I kind of just want to mention just for special reasons. But the first one is, in my opinion, Golden Troop. Now, obviously, this is only if you're playing Chiori, especially for the skill damage, right? So this isn't going to be in a scenario or a build where you're not actually using the Geo Infusion that you can get with Chiori. This is more, you're just focusing on the damage coming from the skill and then also having the burst hit every now and then. So it's more like a sub DPS, which is probably what she is. I know if I were to get Chiori, I'd probably go this route, because, I mean, the amount of damage you can get from the 4-piece on Golden Troop, there's just a lot of skill damage you're getting out of this, right? So this is going to increase that. I really like this set for her. The next set I like is Husk of Opulent Dreams, mainly because of the 2-piece on the defense, but also getting even more defense and geo damage on the 4-piece. And you can get these stacks passively just by being off field over time, much like how Serpent Spine gives you stacks of extra damage while you're on field, right? So that's going to be very good for her. And then the third set I actually really like as well, which this starts to get a little bit more niche, but Archaic Petra. You're getting the 2-piece 15% geo damage bonus, and on the 4-piece, when you get an elemental shard by a crystallized reaction, you will give 35% bonus damage to the elements in your party that are the same element of the crystallized shard that you picked up. So this could give her some placement in some mono teams, perhaps. Like, say you're using a mono pyro team with Lenny, so you're doing like Lenny, Bennett, Xiangling, and then you use Chiori. So Chiori is your flex here, has just extra off-field damage. Well, if you're picking up those pyro crystallized, you're giving all of those units extra damage, and that's going to be especially helpful for specifically Lenny. And so that's kind of placing her in more of a supportive role just because of the 4-piece on this artifact. So that is something you can do. And then the 2 other artifacts I kind of just wanted to briefly mention is Nighttime Whispers in the Echoing Woods, and actually Retracing Bolide. So looking first at Navia's set, you're getting 2-piece attack, so that's going to be very helpful because we know she scales on both attack and defense. And then on the 4-piece, after you use a skill, you'll gain 20% geo damage bonus for 10 seconds, and while you have a crystallized shield, that will be increased by 150%. So kind of going hand in hand with, I just talked about Archaic Petra. You could also use this and be getting a lot of geo damage. It just depends. I think I would just say whatever you have better substats on, but it is, keep in mind, a little bit more niche to, playing around crystallized, which we saw in the trailers in the live streams, right? They're playing her with Navia a lot, and Navia capitalizes on crystallized. So if you're having Navia and Chiori in the same team, chances are you're going to be also having one of the core 4 elements so that you can crystallize. So maybe running them on the same set like that can be beneficial because they're both damage dealers. Lastly, Retracing Bolide. This is very niche, but it was something I did kind of find interesting and totally can work. It's going to increase your shield strength on the 2-piece, and then while you're protected by shield on the 4-piece, you will gain 40% normal charge attack damage. So in this scenario, I would say you're using Zhongli. So increasing the shield is going to be nice, but not necessarily needed. But the 40% extra normal and charge attack damage can be nice for, obviously, if you're using the Geo Infusion. So that's one way it can be played. That's not something I really recommend as too much over the other. Overall, I think Golden Troop would be my personal go-to just because of all the extra skill damage you will get from her skill, which we know she is very skill heavy, as well as the nice hit of damage from her burst.
When looking at actual artifact stats in general, you're going to want to focus on getting an attack or defense % main stat for your sands, and specifically with that, remember, if you do have either an attack % weapon, then you're going to want a defense % sands most likely, or if you have a defense % weapon, you're probably going to want attack % as your sands, just to make sure that you have a balance of both your attack and defense, and she's kind of goes off of both for damage. Now, looking at the goblet, I would say probably your better in suit thing to do is just geo damage in general, considering that's going to be her main way of obviously getting damage out, especially with those skills. So I would try to focus on geo damage bonus, but I know that some people are going to try to do a defense % on the sands and an attack % on the goblet, or vice versa. I think either of these can work as well, considering it helps you balance out, once again, those 2 main stats that she does damage off of anyways. Also, looking at the circlet, you're obviously just like normal if you have a, balancing out your crit ratio. Now, looking at your circlet, obviously you're just going to want to balance out your crit ratio. I wouldn't try to focus on attack % or defense % on this. Try to stay away from that. Try to do better either on your substats or on your main stats on the other 2 pieces, and try to focus on either getting a crit rate or crit damage circlet. In general, on the actual look at the substats, try to only focus on attack percent and defense percent with crit rate and crit damage. The energy recharge isn't really too necessary on her, and obviously elemental mastery, like on most of the characters for Geo, is not going to be very useful at all.
Quickly glancing over at Chiori's constellations, most of these, I will just say, are pretty selfish, already having looked at them. But a lot of people are going to be asking the question, are the first or second constellations worth going after? Possibly. I know that's a big question for a lot of people, that or going after the weapon, which in this case, I'll just go ahead and say I think getting her weapon would be a very, very fine upgrade for her over the constellations. But looking at these constellations, her first one, basically, it's a long description, but basically you're just increasing the damage radius of the skill by 50%. And if you have a Geo party member in your party, which is preferable for the resonance and just having Geo constructs, which already help Chiori, so you'll probably already have that going. Basically, just by having another character in the party, it's going to automatically summon another one of the dolls from her skill. And just keep in mind, you can only have one extra at any one time, so it's not going to stack with the skill as well and give you 3, right? So it's only 2, so that's kind of like, okay, I think personally, if it was giving a third one, this would be a valuable constellation, but it's not. And then also it just states that it will trigger the passive talent, the finishing touch, which is the one that gives you 20% geo damage bonus for 20 seconds. So overall, this constellation, in my personal opinion, isn't that worth, because it's really just a quality of life on how you're getting the second summon of the skill out. You can already do that without this constellation. This is just letting it happen with a little less thought process. Looking at her second constellation, basically just says that for 10 seconds after using Chiori's burst, another different type of doll named Kinu will be summoned next to your active character every 3 seconds. And then this Kinu will attack nearby opponents, dealing AoE geo damage equivalent to 170% of her skill's damage. Specifically, the doll from her skill's damage. And the damage dealt this way is considered skill damage, so that is going to be pretty nice, especially like what I already talked about if you're using 4-piece Golden Troop or you're using Wolfing, that it helps with the skill damage. That is helping this type of damage as well. So as far as the first 2 constellations value, I think the second one is more worth, just because there is actually a lot more damage coming out of this, whereas the C1 isn't really actually increasing your damage. And then looking at the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and even the 6th, those are all just extra damage. You got the 3rd and the 5th increasing the skill and the burst respectively. The 4th just giving you a lot more damage from the skill specifically. You're going to also be able to summon that Kino I just mentioned from the C2, but with the skill, and 3 of those can be summoned repeatedly, not all at the same time, but just over time. So it's a lot of extra damage per rotation. And the C6 basically just gives Chiori a excuse me. And then the C6 just states that after you trigger one of the follow-up effects from the first passive talent, so whether you're pressing the skill after using the skill to switch your character, or you're giving her the Geo Infusion with a normal attack, you will actually reduce the cooldown of the skill by 12 seconds, meaning it will only have a 4-second downtime immediately after having used it. So if you are doing the Geo Infusion, you can use the skill, you'll reduce its cooldown all the way down to 4 seconds, and you'll be doing your Geo hits for 5 seconds. You can use it immediately again, have another Geo Infusion for another 5 seconds, so you can have a Geo Infusion on Chiori for up to 10 seconds through this. And in addition to that, it will increase the damage of Chiori's normal attacks by an amount equal to 235% of her own defense. So this is definitely making Chiori capitalize more on that Geo Infusion and being an on-field damage dealer.
Now, when finally talking about Chiori specific teams, I think the best team that's going to fit her obviously is going to be the Mono Geo team comp. And the reason why is because this is going to maximize really the power that Chiori can really get in general from, I think, the Geo Resonance. Obviously, I think most of her teams are probably going to want, for the Geo Resonance, because you'll be getting that Geo damage bonus as well. But also, the Geo structures that most Geo characters can create are going to help her just do more damage. And by doing so, obviously, it's going to help you obviously have more damage just in general. Now, in this team, Chiori will deal a lot of powerful damage with, characters like Ito, and, Goro does extremely well when there are 3 members of Geo on the team, and then even just throwing in either another Geo character like Zhongli for shielding, or obviously another construct. I think just in general this helps out all around to probably be her best team. Navia is another character that I kind of wanted to throw in here, and the reason why is because even though I thought that Chiori is going to be more focused as a support, I still think that Chiori does an extremely well job for a Navia just in general because of our other characters for Navia. Now, Navia wants a lot of crystallized reactions to be happening. So if you already have another character like Xingqiu or something that already creates a lot of application from a different element that can crystallize with Geo, you're already having that option there. And at this point, Navia is really kind of almost lacking in the sense of trying to get the crystallize to constantly be happening without using her skill or her burst that you kind of want to focus on with damage. And because of this, you can have someone like Chiori that has constant geo application off field to create a bunch of crystallizes, so that while Navia is running around, she can pick those up and then use her skill hits to make big damage happen. So at that point, I think Navia and that Chiori team comp, those two, combined with characters like Bennett and Xingqiu or something, are probably going to be your best bet, or maybe some other characters that in general, like Farina, that can create a lot of hydro application off field without having to worry about normal attacks, and then pairing that with someone like Chiori that does the same thing just with Geo, creating those crystallizes for Navia to do a lot more damage. The last team I do want to throw in is, like Rift was talking about a little while ago, was a mono elemental team with Chiori. Now, if you are going to look to do this specific team, like he stated as well a little while ago, mainly you're going to want to focus Chiori on using that support artifact set in Archaic Petra. And because of that, it'll allow Chiori to deal a lot more damage in general, just from her ability to do a lot of damage off field. So she can support a lot of damage off field, but at the same time, you're helping a lot of those crystallized things to be happening so that you can help more characters off field for Archaic Petra. So keep that in mind when you're looking at teams for this. I still think that Mono Geo is going to be the best way to go, but that does not mean that she is only going to be focused to be only playing in Mono Geo teams.
Yeah, overall, I think she's definitely very flexible, and she's one of those characters to me where she has a lot of fun factor. It's not necessarily a game-changing or meta-breaking character, right? It's just a character that's going to be a lot of fun to have and use and play with, so I think that's going to be very great for a lot of players.
Well, that's everything we have for this video, and we are extremely excited for Chiori, so please go ahead and let us know down in the comments if you guys are excited or if you're pulling for her as well. So make sure to throw that down in the comments, and thank you guys so much for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.